Let's begin here, because too many mistake a simple text for a sign of love. A message that arrives after weeks or months of silence is often seen as proof that someone has changed or that absence has turned into longing. Many hold their breath, thinking perhaps this time the story will be different. But silence followed by sudden return rarely means growth. More often, it is a test, a way of checking whether the door is still open. The truth is harder to face, but necessary to hear. Not every "I miss you" is a confession of love. Sometimes it is only a whisper of ego searching for validation. And when you see it clearly, you no longer confuse nostalgia with respect or habit with devotion. Before I continue, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if reflections like this resonate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Many misunderstand the meaning of return. They think absence itself creates value, as if distance proves desire. But Carl Jung reminded us that what returns without transformation is only repetition. A man who disappears and reappears unchanged does not bring love. He brings a cycle. The persona he wears, charming words, casual tone, hides the shadow of irresponsibility and avoidance. If we fall for the mask, we give our energy to the cycle again and again until exhaustion teaches what clarity would have spared. The hook is not the message itself, but your reaction to it. You pause. You feel the pull of memory. You sense the ache of unfinished story. That pause is the threshold between old patterns and new awareness. In Jung's language, this is the beginning of individuation, the moment when you notice that your worth is not defined by another's sudden attention, but by the standard you hold for yourself. Consider the symbol of the closed door. When someone knocks lightly after vanishing, it may stir the hope of connection. Yet a door is not meant to swing endlessly for those who do not respect the home within. To guard your inner space is not coldness, it is wisdom. Your silence can speak more powerfully than any answer because it declares, "I am not waiting in the shadows. I am not a refuge for your uncertainty." This is the foundation of our reflection. The text on the screen is not about him. It is about you, about how you choose to respond, how you honor your time, how you treat your own soul. Love, as Jung often reminded us, does not punish or confuse. It builds, it steadies, it heals. And when you know this truth, even a small message cannot shake your center. It becomes simply what it is, a signal, a shadow, and nothing more. When the first silence arrives, it does not come with warning. One day the messages flow easily, the voice feels near, and attention seems to promise consistency. And then, without reason, the current stops. What once seemed steady becomes emptiness. There is no explanation, no closure, not even the respect of a goodbye. For many, this moment is the true fracture because it forces the soul to face uncertainty that feels both sharp and invisible. The natural response is to search for meaning inside the silence. A woman may replay conversations in her mind, trace back through words, wondering if she said too much, expected too quickly, revealed too honestly. Anxiety becomes a constant companion, whispering that perhaps she was the cause of his absence. This is the first wound the idea that her value is measured by another's inconsistency. Carl Jung often reminded us that the unconscious projects itself onto the outer world. When someone vanishes, the hidden fears within us awaken. The fear of abandonment, the fear of being too much, the fear of being unworthy. In truth, the silence may speak more about his immaturity than her worth. But the psyche does not know this at once. It interprets absence as rejection, and rejection as confirmation of old shadows. Here we see the clash between the persona and the shadow. The persona says, "I am calm, patient, understanding." It urges her to wait quietly, to excuse his absence as stress or busyness. The shadow, however, stirs beneath resentment, doubt, and a deep cry for clarity. The fracture widens because the mask of patience hides the wound of invisibility. This is where the pattern begins to form. After weeks of silence, the message finally reappears. Casual words. "Hey, I've been busy." Or a vague phrase like, "I was thinking of you." And the emotional storm erupts again. Part of her heart leaps, believing perhaps this return signals change. Another part remembers the ache of waiting. The tension between hope and memory is exhausting yet familiar. Jung wrote that what we do not make conscious will return to us as fate. The man who disappears and returns without change is not offering new possibility. He is repeating a cycle. And if she welcomes him back without question, she also repeats her own cycle, the cycle of doubt, longing, and self-blame. The fracture deepens not because of one man, but because the psyche has not yet recognized its own pattern. Notice how the silence works like a mirror. It reflects not only his lack of presence, but also her hidden wounds. In the mirror, she sees the face of uncertainty, the echo of past neglect, the memory of times she gave and received little in return. This mirror is painful to face, yet it is also an invitation. To look into it is to see where healing must begin. At this stage, many normalize instability. They accept the vanishing act as part of modern love, convincing themselves that everyone is busy, everyone disappears, sometimes everyone deserves another chance. But beneath the rationalizations, the body feels the truth. The stomach tightens, the breath shortens, sleep becomes restless. The unconscious protests because it knows love should not feel like waiting at a closed door. The first fracture is not only in the relationship, it is within the self. It is the split between what she feels and what she allows. She feels neglected, yet allows his return without consequence. She feels anxious, yet presents a calm exterior. She feels wounded, yet tells herself she is too demanding. This internal split is the true damage, for it silences the inner voice in favor of maintaining a fragile connection. Jung called this self-betrayal the beginning of neurosis. When the soul's truth is denied, the psyche suffers. The fracture is not healed by his return, no matter how sweet his words. It is only deepened because she learns that her silence can be ignored, her devotion can be taken for granted, and her needs can be delayed indefinitely. The temptation here is strong. When he returns, even briefly, the nervous system relaxes. The ache of waiting is soothed like a drop of water on parched lips. But this relief is temporary. The pattern teaches her to crave inconsistency, to confuse small gestures with genuine love. The fracture becomes a trap because hope blinds her to the repetition of absence. If we step back, we see the archetypal pattern at work. He plays the role of the wanderer, disappearing into his own shadows, returning only when it suits him. She, without realizing, takes the role of the guardian, keeping the door unlocked, tending the hearth, waiting for footsteps that may or may not arrive. This dynamic is ancient, but it is not balanced. One side carries responsibility, the other avoids it. In Jungian language, this imbalance prevents individuation. Individuation requires facing one's own shadow and choosing wholeness. But when she excuses his absence, she avoids her own confrontation. She avoids asking, "Why do I allow someone else to define my worth? Why do I stay present for someone who cannot stay present for me?" These questions, though painful, are the doorway to growth. The first fracture hurts because it feels personal. Yet it is not only about him. It is about the old wound that comes alive again each time someone withdraws. Perhaps it echoes a childhood memory of waiting for attention that never arrived, or the subtle message that her feelings were too much. The man's absence becomes the stage where those hidden memories replay. Unless they are faced, the pattern continues. And so the cycle of disappearance and return is not merely relational, it is symbolic. It reveals where boundaries are missing, where the inner voice has been silenced, where love of self has been replaced by fear of loss. The fracture shows us what the conscious mind denies, that the relationship has not been equal from the start. The great mistake is believing that his return heals the wound. In truth, every return without accountability makes the wound deeper. Each time the door opens to him without question, her own door to self-respect closes a little more. Over time, this can lead to a life lived in fragments, where her joy depends on his unpredictable presence. Jung taught that wholeness comes not from clinging, but from integration. The first fracture is the signal that something is out of balance, not just in the other person, but in ourselves. If we ignore it, the cycle continues. If we face it, the fracture can become the opening through which light enters. Think of a mirror cracked across the center. Each time she looks into it, the image is distorted. Yet within the crack lies the invitation to replace the mirror altogether. The fracture is painful, but it is also the first sign that something no longer serves. To honor that truth is the beginning of freedom. This is why the first silence matters so deeply. It is not simply his absence. It is her awakening to a pattern that must be named. Without naming it, she risks building her life on shifting sand, waiting for someone who does not know how to stay. But by seeing the fracture clearly, she takes the first step toward wholeness, not by repairing him, but by remembering herself. The fracture begins with silence, but the deeper struggle unfolds when the silence is broken. A message arrives vague and casual, as if nothing had happened. "Hey, I was thinking of you," or "Hope you're doing well." To the untrained eye, such words seem innocent, even kind. But for the woman who has waited, those words ignite a storm. Nostalgia pulls one way, memory of hurt pulls the other. And in that tension, the true conflict between shadow and persona is revealed. The persona speaks first. It says, "Be understanding." He is reaching out. Perhaps he has changed. The mask of patience tells her to smile, to reply gently, to accept the thin thread of connection as if it were enough. The persona is built for this, keeping the peace, protecting the bond, avoiding confrontation. On the surface, it preserves harmony, but beneath the surface, the shadow stirs restlessly. The shadow holds the feelings she does not show. Anger at his disappearance, grief for her waiting suspicion that his words hide selfish motives. These emotions are raw and honest, yet she pushes them down, fearing they will drive him away. And so the fracture widens inside her between the self she presents and the truth she carries. Jung reminded us that what we repress does not disappear. The shadow grows in the dark, influencing choices silently until it demands to be faced. This is how the game begins. He sends vague words, testing the waters, not offering clarity, but seeking reaction. And she, caught between mask and truth, hesitates. If she responds warmly, she betrays her pain. If she ignores him, she feels the ache of loss. Either way, the struggle drains her energy. The game is not about love at all. It is about control, disguised in small gestures. Emotional ambiguity is powerful because it traps the psyche in endless interpretation. Every phrase becomes a riddle, every silence a wound. Instead of living freely, she waits, wonders, and explains his actions on his behalf. The persona provides polite excuses. He is busy. He is stressed. While the shadow whispers the truth, she resists. He has not changed, and his absence spoke louder than his return. In this cycle, her worth becomes dependent on his attention. When he writes, she feels noticed. When he vanishes, she feels forgotten. Her center shifts outside herself into the unpredictable rhythm of another's desire. Jung warned that this projection is dangerous, for when we hand over our inner authority, we become captives of someone else's shadow. Notice how the roles solidify. He takes the role of the one who decides when the door opens and closes. She unconsciously takes the role of the one who waits. The imbalance is stark, yet the persona tells her to endure, because to speak her truth might risk losing him altogether. Here lies the cruel paradox. The very silence she fears is the silence she already lives within. The shadow grows restless when ignored. It appears in anxious thoughts at night, in sudden bursts of resentment, in the deep fatigue of constantly managing appearances. She may even feel shame for her own emotions, believing she is too sensitive, too demanding. But this is projection at work. She carries his avoidance as if it were her flaw. In Jungian terms, she is living inside his shadow rather than integrating her own. This trap is reinforced by small rewards. After long silence, a simple message feels like a gift. A vague phrase feels like hope. Her nervous system relaxes, if only for a moment. This is how intermittent attention becomes addictive. It is not love that binds her, but the tension between scarcity and relief. The persona clings to the relief. The shadow mourns the scarcity, and the cycle repeats. When Jung spoke of the individuation process, he described it as a confrontation with the shadow. Here, that confrontation is unavoidable. To see the pattern clearly is to admit the truth. These games are not signs of love. They are strategies of ego seeking validation, not commitment. He disappears because he can. He returns because she has not yet closed the door. And every time she accepts, she confirms the role he has cast for her. Consider the symbol of the puppet. Each vague word is like a string pulled, making her move, respond, or wait. But the strings only exist if she allows them to. The shadow, though painful, holds the key to freedom. It says, see the strings, see the game, see the cost of pretending this is love. The persona may resist fearing rejection, but the deeper self longs for liberation, even if it means silence of a different kind. The silence of closing the door. The stakes are high because this struggle is not only external, it is an inner battle between loyalty to the mask and loyalty to the truth. If she continues to honor the persona, she betrays herself. If she honors the shadow, she risks losing him but gains herself. Jung wrote that no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. To face the shadow is to touch the pain of neglect, but also to anchor the soul in honesty. These dynamics are not limited to one relationship. They echo across many lives, repeating until the pattern is broken. Each vague message, each calculated silence is a mirror of how we betray ourselves when we choose appearance over authenticity. The persona says, keep the peace. The shadow says, keep your truth. The choice between them defines whether the cycle continues or ends. What is most dangerous here is not his silence, but her adaptation to it. When neglect becomes normal, when inconsistency feels acceptable, the soul forgets its own standard. Love is no longer measured by presence and reciprocity, but by crumbs of attention. And once the standard is lowered, the pattern is hard to escape. This is why the shadow must be faced not to condemn him, but to free her. The game thrives on confusion. His words are vague, his intent unclear, his timing convenient. But beneath the ambiguity lies a simple truth. Clarity is absent because commitment is absent. The persona wants to believe otherwise. The shadow insists on reality. The tension between them is the battlefield of the soul. To break this cycle requires naming it. Ambiguity is not mystery, it is avoidance. Silence is not space, it is punishment. A sudden return is not love, it is habit. When these truths are named, the shadow and persona no longer fight each other. They integrate, and the self becomes whole. This stage of the journey is painful because it feels like betrayal from within. The mask has protected her for so long that removing it feels dangerous. Yet individuation demands exactly this. To live in harmony with the self, the mask must be set aside and the shadow embraced. Only then does the cycle lose its power. The game may continue, but she no longer plays. The message may arrive, but it no longer defines her. The silence may fall, but it no longer shatters her peace. By facing the shadow, she begins to claim her center again. This is not the end of the story, but it is the turning point. For once the strings are seen, they can be cut. And once they are cut, the self is free to rise beyond the trap of emotional games. The turning point does not arrive with fanfare. It comes quietly often in the same moment when the cycle tries to repeat again. Another message, another vague phrase, another silence disguised as distance. But this time, something shifts. Instead of rushing to respond, instead of placing her worth in someone else's absence or return, she notices the pattern. That recognition is the beginning of awakening. Carl Jung often said that until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The sudden text, the long silence, the emotional whiplash, none of it is fate. It is a pattern, and patterns can be seen. When seen clearly, they lose their hold. What once felt like destiny is revealed as choice, and what was choice can be changed. Awakening is not the disappearance of pain. It is the first moment of clarity within the pain. It is looking at the same words on a screen, the same casual, hey, and realizing this does not carry love, it carries repetition. Where once the persona rushed to excuse and the shadow raged in silence, the self now steps forward. The self is the deeper center that knows balance, that does not cling to masks or fear the dark. It looks at the mirror and says, "This is not about him. It is about me." The mirror is a powerful symbol in Jungian thought. For so long, she looked into his words as if they reflected her value. But now, she sees that the mirror was never clean. It showed only what he projected, not what she truly is. Awakening means cleaning the mirror, removing the smudges of neglect, the distortions of avoidance, the shadows of manipulation, and seeing herself clearly for the first time in this story. There is a tenderness in this clarity. It does not shout, "I deserve better," in defiance. It whispers gently, "I no longer confuse attention with devotion." The heart softens not toward him, but toward herself. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. In awakening, she begins to feel that privilege. She senses her time and energy are sacred, not to be traded for crumbs of presence. Awakening also reveals the difference between love and habit. Love seeks to build, to show up with consistency, to face conflict honestly. Habit seeks comfort, ego validation, and easy refuge. His words no longer appear as signs of care. They appear as habits of avoidance. And once she sees this, she cannot unsee it. The cycle that once trapped her now seems transparent, even predictable. It loses its mystery, and with that much of its power. In Jungian language, awakening is the first union of shadow and persona. She admits the anger she once hid. She acknowledges the grief she once swallowed. She faces the fear of being alone, and instead of running, she breathes through it. By holding both mask and truth together, she steps closer to individuation. She no longer splits herself between what she feels and what she presents. She begins to live as one. Consider the symbol of the closed door again. In the past, every knock made her tremble with hope or fear. Awakening means she now sees the door differently. It is not only an entry for others, it is the boundary of her inner sanctuary. To guard that door is not bitterness, it is reverence. A closed door can protect as much as an open one can welcome. Both are acts of choice, and choice is the essence of dignity. This shift is not without its struggles. Old emotions rise up, longing, nostalgia. the ache of memory. The shadow whispers, "But what if he has changed? What if this time is different?" Awakening does not silence those voices instantly. Instead, it teaches her to listen without obeying. She can feel the longing and still keep the door closed. She can feel the doubt and still honor her clarity. This balance between emotion and action is the first taste of freedom. Awakening also brings a new lens on silence. Once his silence was a punishment, a form of control. Now, her silence becomes a choice, a source of strength. When she does not respond, it is not out of fear or confusion, but out of wisdom. This silence carries power because it is aligned with self-respect. It speaks louder than any reply. Jung taught that where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling. Her silence is both a thought and a feeling united in truth. It is important to see that awakening is not an act against him. It is an act for herself. It is not revenge, not bitterness, not coldness. It is integration. It is the soul remembering its wholeness after being fractured by neglect. She realizes that the greatest betrayal was not his absence, but her willingness to betray herself for the hope of his presence. That recognition hurts, but it also heals because it brings responsibility back to her own hands. Awakening also shifts how she views time. Before, every day of silence felt like wasted life. Every sudden message felt like a revival of hope. Now, she understands her time is her own. To waste it, waiting for someone who does not know how to stay, is to live half a life. And she is not here for half measures. She is here for fullness. To claim her time is to claim her soul. This is where individuation begins to show its fruit. She sees the cycle not as romance, but as lesson. The man who disappears and returns is no longer a mystery to solve, but a mirror to outgrow. He taught her unwillingly where her boundaries are weak. He revealed the cost of her silence, the hunger of her shadow, the fragility of her mask. For that she may feel a strange gratitude not toward him as a partner, but toward the experience as a teacher. Awakening reframes pain into wisdom. In this stage, many feel both sadness and relief. Sadness for the years or months given to someone who never stayed. Relief for finally seeing clearly what once seemed foggy. Both emotions belong. Both are part of the awakening. To grieve and to rejoice at once is to honor the depth of the journey. Jung reminded us that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. But within the pain lies transformation, and within transformation lies peace. The awakened soul also begins to imagine a new kind of love. One that does not vanish. One that does not punish, one that does not play games with silence or vague words. She does not know yet when or where she will find it, but she knows what it must look like. That vision becomes her compass, guiding her away from repetition and toward possibility. Even if no one else appears, she knows she has already found the first love she needed, love of self. Awakening is not the end of the story, but it is the hinge upon which everything turns. Once the pattern is seen, it cannot be unseen. Once the mask is removed, it cannot be worn the same way again. And once the shadow is faced, It no longer needs to sabotage from the dark. From here, the choices become clearer. The path narrows not with limitation, but with focus. She knows what she will no longer allow, and that knowledge sets her free. In the end, the awakening is quiet. It does not demand applause or recognition. It shows itself in small acts, a pause before replying, a refusal to accept crumbs, a gentle turning inward when the old cycle knocks again. These acts, though subtle, are revolutionary. They mark the moment when the soul stops betraying itself and begins to live in truth. And once truth becomes the standard, the shadow of manipulation fades into irrelevance. Awakening by itself is not enough. To see the pattern clearly is powerful, but unless the vision is carried into action, the old cycle remains a temptation. The next step is choice, an act of boundary that transforms clarity into lived reality. Without it, awareness becomes only knowledge, but with it, awareness becomes freedom. This is where many falter, because choice feels final. To close the door is to end the possibility that he might one day return with sincerity. Yet this is exactly the test of individuation. Jung described individuation as the courage to live one's own truth, even when it separates you from the familiar. And here the familiar is not love, but instability. To break free means to reject the comfort of crumbs in order to honor the hunger for fullness. A boundary is not built in anger. It is not a wall of bitterness or revenge. It is a quiet declaration of value. A woman may choose silence, not because she is cold, but because she is clear. She may decline the vague invitation, not because she lacks compassion, but because she finally refuses to confuse inconsistency with care. This is dignity in practice, the soul refusing to bend to what once fractured it. Consider the symbol of the threshold. For too long, she stood just inside the doorway, waiting for footsteps that came and went. Now, she places her hand on the doorframe and decides. The threshold will no longer be crossed by those who vanish without respect. The home of her inner life is no longer open to the wandering ego. The door does not slam. It closes gently, but it stays closed. The act of boundary often feels small from the outside. It may be a decision not to answer a message. It may be the refusal to explain her silence. Yet inwardly, this act is vast. It signals to the unconscious, I am no longer betraying myself. Jung taught that when one small part of the psyche realigns with truth, the entire system begins to heal. A single no can echo like 1,000 yeses to the soul. Boundaries transform silence into strength. Once silence was punishment used against her. Now, silence becomes her shield. Once his absence made her question her worth. Now, her absence declares it. This reversal is not about power over another. It is about power within herself. She no longer waits in shadows for him to return. She stands in light knowing that the cycle will only continue if she reopens the door. This choice has consequences, as all choices do. At first, the ego may resist. The familiar ache of longing may arise. Doubts may whisper, "What if you are too harsh? What if he truly meant it this time?" Yet each time she resists the pull, the voice of clarity grows stronger. The old self, the one that accepted crumbs, fades. The new self, the one that demands reciprocity, emerges. This is transformation, not of circumstance, but of identity. In Jungian terms, the choice is an act of integration. The shadow once repressed has spoken. I am angry. I am tired. I am worthy of more. The persona, once pretending patience, steps aside. And the self, the wholeness beyond both mask and wound, acts. That act is the boundary. That act is the refusal. That act is the gentle but unshakable no. This moment is often misunderstood. Some believe boundaries push people away, but the deeper truth is that boundaries allow love to exist at all. Without them, love collapses into dependency or manipulation. With them, love flourishes in freedom and respect. Jung knew this when he said that respect begins with what you no longer allow to harm you. To set a boundary is to protect the soil in which real love may grow. Think of a garden. For years, weeds have entered unchecked, choking what might have blossomed. To place a fence is not to hate the outside world, it is to honor what grows within. In the same way, closing the door on inconsistent love is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of care for the heart, for the soul, for the future. And what happens to him? He may knock again, confused by the silence that no longer bends. He may test the lock, sending more vague words into the night. But the awakened self knows the test is not his, it is hers. Every unanswered message strengthens the boundary. Every refusal to reopen the cycle proves that the transformation is real. The garden begins to breathe. This is where fear begins to release its grip. Once fear of losing him kept her in the pattern. Now she sees the greater fear is losing herself. Once she thought loneliness was unbearable. Now she realizes that loneliness within a cycle of neglect is far more painful than solitude with dignity. This reframe shifts everything. What once seemed like loss becomes liberation. The choice is also a statement of time. For years, perhaps, she gave her hours, her days, her emotional energy to waiting. Now, she claims them back. To not respond is to declare my time is no longer for rent. My life is no longer on pause. This time belongs to me. Jung wrote that until you value yourself, you will not value your time. And until you value your time, you will not do anything with it. To set a boundary is to step into time that is finally one's own. This stage may be quiet, but it carries an unmistakable dignity. Friends may not notice, the world may not applaud, but inside, something changes forever. She is no longer the woman who waits by the door. She is the woman who walks into her own house, closes the door, and sits in peace. She belongs to herself. That belonging is the deepest transformation. In the rhythm of individuation, this choice is the bridge between awakening and integration. Awakening sees the pattern. Boundary ends it. Awakening cleanses the mirror. Boundary refuses to let it be smudged again. Awakening whispers, "You deserve more." Boundary proves it with action. Without this step, the cycle continues. With it, the cycle dissolves. Here the archetype shifts. She is no longer the guardian of the threshold waiting for the wanderer to return. She becomes the sovereign of her inner world, the one who decides who may enter and who may not. This sovereignty is not isolation, it is preparation. For only a sovereign can meet an equal, and only when she stands in her own dignity can she invite someone who stands in theirs. The act of boundary, then, is not an end, but a beginning. It begins a new chapter, where her energy is no longer drained by uncertainty, but invested in growth, where her worth is no longer questioned, but embodied, where love is no longer begged for, but awaited with confidence. The boundary closes one door, but it opens another, the door to real connection, to equal partnership, to self-respect lived in daily choices. In the end, the transformation is subtle yet profound. A message arrives as it always did, but this time she smiles gently, places the phone down, and continues living. No storm, no battle, no fracture, just clarity, just peace. And in that peace she discovers what the cycle could never give her: the strength of choosing herself. Every journey of the soul reaches a point of rest. After the storms of silence, the patterns of return, and the battle between mask and truth, something finally settles. The cycle that once held so much power now feels smaller, almost fragile, when seen in the light of awakening. The ending is not dramatic. It is calm, almost quiet, because true closure is never a performance. It is simply the soul deciding enough. The lesson is not that men vanish or that words deceive. That has always been true. The deeper lesson is that love cannot thrive without respect, and respect cannot exist without boundary. For too long, the self was fractured, caught between what was felt and what was allowed. But now, after awakening, the soul reclaims its center. It chooses clarity over confusion, peace over chaos, dignity over doubt. Carl Jung reminded us that the greatest loss is not when someone leaves, but when we abandon ourselves. The story we have traced is one of returning home, not to him, but to the self that was waiting within all along. To honor that self is the beginning of individuation. It is the act of gathering every scattered part and saying you belong, you are whole, you are enough. Closure does not mean the absence of longing. There may still be memories, still a trace of hope that whispers in unguarded moments. Healing does not erase the past, it integrates it. The difference now is that memory no longer controls. Longing may visit, but it no longer decides. The soul feels both the ache of what was and the strength of what is. That balance is maturity. Think of a cracked mirror. For years you looked into it and saw only distortion. Every silence, every vague word widened the crack. Awakening showed you the damage. Boundary taught you to set it aside. Closure is choosing a new mirror altogether. When you look into it now, You see not his shadow, not his absence, but your own reflection. Clear, steady, undivided. That reflection is the reward of the journey. This final stage is where gratitude begins to rise, though not in the way people expect. It is not gratitude for his inconsistency, but for what it revealed. Without the fracture, the shadow would have remained hidden. Without the shadow, awakening would not have come. And without awakening, the act of choosing wholeness might never have arrived. Pain became the teacher. Silence became the mirror. Confusion became the path toward clarity. Here the archetype shifts again. She is no longer the guardian of the threshold, nor even the sovereign of her own sanctuary. She becomes the seer, the one who knows the pattern, who recognizes it in herself and in others, and who refuses to repeat it. With this vision comes compassion, not for the games themselves, but for the countless souls still caught in them. She sees that many are still waiting by doors that never open. And from her wholeness, she can gently remind them, you do not have to wait there. This is the essence of closure, not the end of love, but the beginning of self-respect. The truth is simple. You deserve presence, not absence. You deserve words that are followed by action, not phrases that vanish into silence. You deserve a partner who stands, not one who drifts. And most of all, you deserve the kind of love that begins with yourself. Jung once wrote that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of the self, but by integrating the opposites. In this story, the opposites were clear: the persona that wanted to please, and the shadow that cried out in anger. Individuation meant allowing both to speak and then choosing from a higher place, the self. That self now stands quietly, firmly, with boundaries that no longer feel like punishment, but like protection. As this reflection closes, let us hold the image of a door one final time. For years, it stood ajar, opening and closing at the will of another. Today, it is closed with intention, not in bitterness, but in reverence. On the other side of that door lies silence, but it no longer hurts. It no longer punishes. It is simply absence. And absence, when chosen, is a form of peace. The true ending is not the loss of him, but the return of her. She discovers that she was never waiting for someone else to choose her. She was waiting to choose herself. That choice is the quiet revolution of the soul, the act of individuation made real. From here, love is no longer a desperate search. It is a natural overflow. When she meets someone new, it will not be to complete her, but to accompany her, for she is already whole. So the story ends not with regret, but with dignity, not with bitterness, but with wisdom. Love will come again in time, but it will be met differently. No longer from fear of being left, but from the joy of being enough. That is the gift of the cycle, the reward of the fracture, the meaning of the awakening. And now, I leave you with this reflection from Jung himself. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The man who vanished was not the meaning. He was the mirror. The meaning was always you. Before we part, I invite you to reflect. Which part of this journey spoke most deeply to you? Share it in the comments, not for me, but for those listening alongside you tonight who may need to hear your truth. And if these reflections have given you peace, I welcome you to stay connected by subscribing so this circle of thought and healing continues to grow.